Radar Picket Station Number 1, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa, 16 April, 1945, 830 hours. The morning is deceptively calm, the kind of Pacific quiet that makes young sailors check the horizon twice. Aboard the destroyer USS Laffey, Commander Frederick Beckton stands on the bridge, watching the scopes. His ship bristles with weapons. 6 5-inch guns, 12 Bofors 40mm cannons, 11 20mm Oerlikons. 2 smaller support landing craft float nearby, their own Bofors mounts trained skyward. Everyone knows what's coming. They've known since the orders arrived 3 days ago, pulling Laffey from the relative safety of the bombardment line and sending her here to the most exposed, most dangerous position in the entire Okinawa campaign. On the radar, a single contact appears, then another, then dozens more, multiplying like a disease across the screen. 50 aircraft, bearing down from the north. The alarm sounds. Men race to their stations. The Bofors crews, 11 men per quad mount, take their positions around the Swedish-designed weapons that have become the backbone of American close-in defense. What happens in the next 80 minutes will prove whether these rapid-fire cannons can do what American admirals desperately need them to do: stop men willing to die from killing everyone aboard. The Kamikaze was Japan's answer to mathematics. By April of 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy had been gutted at Leyte Gulf. Most experienced pilots were dead. Fuel reserves were nearly exhausted. American industrial capacity had produced a fleet so vast that conventional tactics offered no path to victory. But suicide attacks changed the calculus. A pilot needed only enough training to take off, navigate, and dive. The aircraft became the warhead. 1 plane, 1 ship. The effectiveness was terrifying. Between October 1944 and January 1945, Kamikazes scored hits on 121 ships, a success rate exceeding 34%. Conventional bombing raids achieved just 2%. For every 12 hits inflicted, suicide tactics required only 60 aircraft compared to 220 for traditional attacks. The American response evolved rapidly. Fighter combat air patrols pushed farther from the fleet. Radar picket destroyers formed a defensive ring 80 miles out, vessels deliberately positioned to detect incoming raids and absorb the first wave of attacks. These ships became magnets for death, and when the fighters couldn't intercept in time, when the radar pickets stood alone against waves of aircraft, everything depended on their guns. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Bofors 40mm was not an American invention. Its story began in 1928, when Swedish Navy Captain Victor Hammarskjöld watched his fleet's anti-aircraft guns fail during exercises. Every shot missed. Frustrated by weapons that couldn't hit targets moving faster than 150 miles per hour, he approached the Swedish Bofors company. The firm, better known for producing steel, kitchen equipment, and various industrial products than weapons, received a contract to solve an impossible problem: create a gun that could actually hit aircraft moving at 300 miles per hour. What emerged was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. The Bofors fired 2-pound high-explosive shells at 120 rounds per minute per barrel, 4 times faster than comparable weapons of the era. The automatic feed system meant continuous fire, without manual reloading between bursts. Hydraulic power-assisted controls allowed a single pointer to track diving aircraft with fingertip pressure, following targets through violent evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible with purely manual systems. The predictor sight calculated where an aircraft would be seconds into the future, compensating for speed, altitude, and the shell's flight time. By 1932, the weapon was ready. Foreign orders arrived immediately. Here's where neutrality became profitable. Sweden sold manufacturing licenses to anyone with cash. Britain purchased rights in 1939. Poland, Norway, and Belgium followed. So did Hungary and Finland, nations that would end up fighting on opposite sides of the coming war. The United States acquired a sample gun through an elaborate covert operation in 1940, smuggling it via Finland on the passenger liner American Legion to evade Swedish export restrictions that were, at that point, still being enforced. The ship sailed from Scandinavia, carrying what would become one of the most important weapons transfers of the war, hidden among legitimate cargo. When American engineers examined the weapon at the Naval Proving Ground in Dahlgren, Virginia, they found exactly what they needed. The Navy began mass production in 1942, even before securing formal licensing agreements with Sweden. The Swedish government initially demanded manufacturing rights to American aviation technology in exchange for proper Bofors licenses. The Swedes relented only in June of 1941, when they discovered that almost none of the key Bofors technologies were actually protected by patents in the United States, and it became clear the Americans were prepared to begin manufacture with or without formal permission. Chrysler Corporation retooled automobile factories to produce Bofors guns at rates that would have seemed impossible before the war. By December 1942, monthly production reached 135 twin-barrel naval mounts. By 1943, production exceeded 13,000 single guns for the Army. The scale was staggering. Factories that had been building sedans and trucks were now churning out precision weapons systems. Workers who had assembled transmissions learned to fit breech mechanisms. The American industrial machine, once it focused on a problem, solved it through sheer productive capacity. The American version differed significantly from the Swedish original, where Sweden produced manually operated single and twin mounts with simple optical sights. The U.S. Navy developed power-operated quad mounts, essentially two twin assemblies side by side on a single rotating platform. The Mark 51 Director, a pedestal-mounted lead-calculating electromechanical sight, could slave up to 4 quad mounts to a single point of aim, creating concentrated fields of fire with 64 barrels firing simultaneously. Water cooling jackets replaced air cooling, allowing sustained fire rates that would have melted Swedish barrels. Electric drives, hastily adapted from the failed 1.1-inch gun program, provided power traverse and elevation. Every modification aimed at one goal: maximum volume of steel in the air. By mid-1944, Bofors guns had replaced the failed 1.1-inch guns on virtually every American warship. The 1.1-inch, nicknamed the Chicago Piano for its distinctive sound, had proven unreliable and ineffective. It jammed frequently. Its rate of fire was too slow. Its shells lacked stopping power. The Bofors, by contrast, worked. Iowa-class battleships carried 80 40mm guns. Essex-class carriers mounted 72. The old carrier Saratoga, brought out of mothballs and pressed back into service, received 100 Bofors guns, turning her into a floating anti-aircraft fortress. Destroyers like Laffey carried 12 in 3 twin mounts and 2 quad mounts. Even PT boats mounted single Bofors when deck space allowed. The gun became so ubiquitous that crews stopped thinking of it as Swedish. It was simply the 40mm, the weapon you aimed at anything, trying to kill you. The ammunition itself was elegant in its lethality. Each shell weighed precisely 9/10 of a kilogram, just under 2 pounds, packed with 2.5 ounces of high explosive. The brass cases came pre-loaded in 4-round clips that loaders could slam into the top-mounted feed guides in seconds. The design was foolproof. Gravity fed the clips down into the breech, where each shell was automatically rammed, fired, and ejected in a continuous cycle as long as the trigger remained pressed and ammunition kept flowing. The shells self-destructed at 4,000 yards if they missed their target, preventing friendly fire casualties from rounds arcing back to Earth miles away. Muzzle velocity exceeded 3,000 feet per second. At 2,000 meters, the Bofors' effective range, a shell arrived in under 3 seconds. The explosive radius was small, perhaps 15 feet, but fragment velocity was tremendous. A single hit could shred aluminum control surfaces, sever hydraulic lines, ignite fuel tanks, or kill a pilot outright. This mattered against kamikazes in ways it hadn't against conventional attackers. A bomber pilot trying to survive would break off when damaged, nursing his crippled aircraft back to base or bailing out over friendly territory. A kamikaze pilot, already committed to death, already resigned to never returning, would fly a crippled aircraft into the target if any control remained. The Bofors had to do more than damage. It had to disintegrate, and it had to do so while the aircraft was still far enough away that debris and momentum wouldn't carry the wreckage into the ship anyway. A kamikaze destroyed at 50 yards might still crash into the vessel through sheer kinetic energy. The gun crews learned to shoot early and shoot continuously, creating overlapping fields of fire that tore aircraft apart at 300 yards or more. The crews manning these weapons trained for months. A quad mount required 11 men, working in perfect coordination. A pointer who aimed in elevation, watching the target through his optical sight and adjusting constantly for the aircraft's climb or dive. A trainer who aimed in traverse, swinging the entire mount left or right to track horizontal movement. A gun captain who coordinated the mount, called out targets, and made split-second decisions about which threat to engage when multiple aircraft attacked simultaneously, and 8 loaders who fed the 4 hungry barrels. The loaders worked in pairs, 1 for each gun. They pulled 4-round clips from ready-service ammunition lockers welded to the deck beside each mount. The clips weighed several pounds each, not individually heavy, but exhausting when you're handling dozens per minute. They had to be inserted into the top-mounted feed guides with the rounds facing forward, the brass cases facing aft. Insert it backwards and the gun jammed. Jam the gun during an attack, and men died. So loaders practiced until they could load blindfolded, until they could do it with shrapnel in their arms, until they could do it while the mount was traversing and elevating beneath them. They worked in a choreographed dance, passing clips from ready service lockers, jamming them into feed guides, clearing jams when hot chambers seized, all while incoming aircraft screamed toward them at terminal velocity. When a gun ran dry, the loader had perhaps 2 seconds to get another clip into the guide before the pointer lost his firing solution. 2 seconds while the mount was swinging to track a diving aircraft. 2 seconds while bombs were falling and other kamikazes were attacking from different vectors. 2 seconds that meant the difference between shooting down the attacker and being killed by it. The noise was overwhelming. 120 rounds per minute per barrel meant 8 rounds per second from a quad mount. 32 shells leaving the muzzles every second, a continuous jackhammer roar that made communication impossible except through hand signals and intuition developed through endless drills. Men went deaf in one ear, then both. They stuffed cotton in their ears, but it did little good. The concussion from the muzzle blast was physical, a repeated punch to the chest with every volley. Men stationed near the mounts developed chronic headaches, ringing ears that never stopped, sensitivity to loud noises that persisted for decades after the war. The mounts traversed and elevated under power, but manual backup systems existed for when electrical systems failed, and electrical systems failed constantly under combat conditions. Shrapnel severed power lines, near-miss bombs knocked out generators, fire damaged control circuits. When power failed, the gun crews reverted to manual cranks, and cranking a multi-ton weapon assembly by hand while under attack required desperate strength. 2 men on the traverse crank, 2 on the elevation crank, straining against the weight of steel and ammunition, while the gun captain screamed directions and loaders continued feeding the weapons. It was exhausting work under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, with adrenaline masking fatigue and fear, men found strength they didn't know they possessed. Burns from hot shell casings were routine, the brass cases ejected automatically, tumbling out of the breech and falling to the deck. Fresh from the chamber, they were hot enough to raise blisters on contact. Loaders learned to wear heavy gloves, but gloves made handling the clips slower, so many worked bare-handed and accepted the burns as part of the job. Shrapnel from near misses peppered exposed skin. The mounts had splinter shields, thin steel plates designed to stop fragments, but not direct hits, but the shields didn't cover everything. Arms, legs, backs, necks were exposed. Men bled and kept loading, and always. The knowledge that you were the last line of defense. If the 5-inch guns missed, if the combat air patrol and didn't intercept, if the 20mm couldn't stop the attacker, the Bofors was the final barrier between the kamikaze and the ship. If you failed, everyone died. Not just your gun crew, not just the men on your mount. Everyone. The 336 men aboard Laffy, the thousands of men on carriers and battleships behind the picket line. Failure was not abstract, it was immediate and total. But the weapon worked. Statistics compiled during the Philippines campaign showed the Bofors accounting for roughly half of all aircraft shot down by naval surface forces between October 1944 and February 1945. During that period, American ships engaged 1,444 Japanese aircraft. Of those, 352 were kamikazes. The kamikazes achieved 121 hits, a 34% success rate. But that meant 231 kamikazes were destroyed before reaching their targets. Combat air patrol accounted for many of those kills, but ships' guns, primarily Bofors, destroyed the rest. The gun's sweet spot was the range where 5-inch guns lost tracking resolution, but 20mm Oerlikons lacked stopping power, roughly 1,000 to 3,000 yards. In that envelope, a well-drilled Bofors crew could put 800 rounds into the air in 1 minute, creating a cone of fragments no aircraft could penetrate intact. The pattern was simple. The pointer tracked the target, the trainer kept the mount aligned, the gun captain called corrections, and the loaders fed ammunition until the target disintegrated or the loader collapsed from exhaustion. The Japanese understood this. Kamikaze pilots received extensive briefings on American defensive layouts before their final missions. They learned to approach from multiple vectors simultaneously, overwhelming fire directors and forcing gun crews to split their attention. They learned to dive through their own aircraft's debris, using destroyed kamikazes as shrapnel shields. They learned to time attacks for dawn and dusk when optical sights struggled with backlighting and shadows. They flew outdated biplanes Yokosuka K-5Y trainers with wooden frames and fabric skins that radar struggled to detect, and that could absorb damage without the immediate structural failure that would down modern all-metal aircraft. A fabric-covered biplane hit by 40mm shells might have holes torn through its wings and fuselage, but remain airworthy long enough to complete its dive. None of it changed the fundamental equation. If a kamikaze entered the Bofors envelope with the guns operational and the crew trained, it had perhaps 10 seconds to impact. In those 10 seconds, a quad mount could fire 80 rounds. If 2 quad mounts achieved crossfire, 160 rounds converged on a single target. The math was simple and brutal. Aircraft are fragile. Steel is not. Aboard Laffy, the morning's first contact approaches. 830 hours. The lookout spots it visually before radar confirms an Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, recognizable by its fixed landing gear. Essentially a death trap by 1945 standards, but still capable of carrying a bomb to a target. The forward 5-inch guns open fire at maximum range, heavy shells arcing upward trailing smoke. The Val jettisons its bomb harmlessly and retreats. It was reconnaissance. The pilot's job was to confirm the position of the American ships and report back. He's done that. The main attack is inbound. General quarters sounds. Men who had relaxed slightly after days of relative quiet sprint to battle stations. In the plotting room, the radar operators watch contacts multiply. In the engine room, engineers prepare for emergency speed. On deck, gun crews strip the canvas covers from their weapons and begin loading. Ammunition handlers form human chains from the magazines below decks to the ready service lockers. Topside. Every man knows what's coming. 842 hours. 4 more Val's break formation and dive. 2 from the bow, 2 from the stern. Coordinated assault meant to split defensive fire and ensure at least 1 aircraft got through. Commander Beckton orders hard left rudder, bringing Laffy broadside to present maximum gun arcs. It's a calculated risk. Broadside presents a larger target, but it allows every weapon to bear. The forward 5-inch mounts engage at 3,000 yards. The first Val takes a direct hit and disintegrates mid-air, a puff of flame and smoke and tumbling wreckage. The second sheds pieces, control surfaces, landing gear, chunks of fuselage and tumbles into the sea trailing smoke. The aft 5-inch mount tracks the stern approaches. The third Val enters its sights. The gun speaks, a sharp crack followed by the whistle of the shell's flight. Impact. The Val breaks apart. The fourth Val is lower now, skimming the wave tops, trying to stay under the 5-inch gun's depression limit. It's the Bofors that kill it. Mounts 43 and 44 traverse smoothly, their pointers tracking through the Mark 51 directors. Both mounts open fire simultaneously. Converging streams of 40mm shells tear through the engine cowling. The valve's propeller shatters. The engine seizes. The aircraft noses down and hits water at 200 miles per hour. The impact is catastrophic. The bomb detonates on contact with the sea. A waterspout erupts 30 yards from Laffy's hull. Immediately, not seconds later, immediately 2 Yokosuka D-4Ys, Judy dive bombers, scream in from the beams. These are faster than Val's, more modern, more dangerous. The starboard Judy enters the Bofors envelope at 1,400 yards. Mount 43, a quad mount amidships, tracks smoothly. The pointer has him. The trainer has him. The gun captain gives the order. The loaders are ready. The trigger breaks. 8 barrels erupt in a sustained burst. The Judy comes apart, not gradually but catastrophically, as if an invisible hammer struck it. Wings fold backward. The fuselage tumbles forward. Pieces separate engine, canopy, tail assembly, each following its own ballistic arc. The main wreckage splashes harmlessly 200 yards out. The Port Judy receives the same treatment from Mount 44. But this pilot is better, or luckier, or perhaps the gun crew is a half-second slow. The Judy takes hits, the port wing ignites, streaming fuel and flame, but momentum carries it forward. The pilot doesn't deviate. He's committed. The aircraft crashes 50 yards off the port quarter. The bomb detonates underwater. The explosion lifts Laffy's stern slightly. Fragments sleeve through the water and punch through the thin hull plating. More critically, the blast wave severs all communications lines to the remaining aft 5-inch guns. 3 gunners' mates collapse, wounded by shrapnel that came through ventilation openings. Ensign Jim Townsley, witnessing the communications failure, acts instantly. He grabs a sound-powered telephone handset, jury-rigs a microphone setup, straps it around his neck with a piece of line, and climbs atop the pilot house where he has clear line of sight to every gun position. From this exposed position, with no protection whatsoever, he will spend the rest of the battle calling out targets and corrections to gun crews who can no longer receive fire control data through normal channels. It's improvisation born of desperation. And it works. 844 hours. 12 minutes into the attack. 8 aircraft engaged. 8 destroyed. But no one is celebrating. The radar scope looks like a snowstorm. More contacts. Many more. The 9th attacker is another Val, boring in from the port bow. Every gun that can bear opens fire. The forward 5-inch mounts throw up heavy shells that trace white contrails against the blue sky. The Bofors quad mounts traverse smoothly, their hydraulic systems whining under the strain, oil pressure gauges climbing into the red zone. 20mm Oerlikons add their lighter but faster fire, creating a web of tracers. The Val's wing tanks rupture under the barrage, streaming fuel that ignites almost immediately. The aircraft becomes a flying torch. The pilot banks between Laffy's stacks, perhaps trying to hit the bridge, perhaps simply out of control, past the point where intention matters. The aircraft's landing gear, still extended, obliterates the starboard side 20mm mounts. 2 40mm guns on Mount 44 are destroyed by the impact. The Val loses a wing, topples over the side, and crashes into the ocean 20 feet from the hull. The gasoline-fed fireball engulfs the mount. 3 men are dead instantly. 4 more are burning. The mount is ablaze. Damage control parties rush forward with fire hoses, but there's no time. Seconds later, another Val dives from astern. This pilot aims precisely, targeting the aft 5-inch gun mount that has been so devastatingly effective. Gun mount 53. The crew sees death approaching at 300 miles per hour and keeps firing. They are Lawrence Delevsky, Robert Johnson, James Gowding, and 6 others, whose names would be read at memorial services weeks later. They keep firing because that's what you do. That's what training demands. That's what survival requires. The Val takes hit after hit, the wings are shredded. The engine is smoking, pieces are falling away, but it doesn't deviate. It slams into gun mount 53 at the fantail with the force of a meteorite. The impact alone kills 2 men. Then, the bomb detonates. The explosion is beyond description, a white-hot flash that vaporizes everything within 20 feet. The powder magazine cooks off a split second later. The entire gun mount erupts in a secondary explosion that can be heard miles away. The blast wave knocks men flat on the main deck. The 5-inch gun barrel, weighing several tons, is blown clear off its mount. The gun house simply ceases to exist, replaced by a crater filled with burning powder and twisted steel. The explosion tears through bulkheads, rips open compartments 3 decks down, kills men below decks who never saw the aircraft, who died not knowing what hit them. Fire spreads instantly through passageways, following ventilation ducts, consuming paint and insulation and anything else flammable. The stern becomes an inferno. 847 hours, a third Val attacks the already burning aft section. Laffey's remaining guns engage, but the stern is a chaos of smoke and flame that makes target acquisition nearly impossible. The pointer on Mount 42, one of the twin mounts still operational, tracks through the smoke by instinct and training. He fires blind when he thinks the aircraft is in his sights. The Val's left wing catches fire from Bofors tracers, whether from Mount 42 or from one of the support landing craft nearby. No one can say. The aircraft, already mortally wounded, crashes into the burning gun Mount 53, piling wreckage on wreckage, adding its own fuel load to fires already consuming the stern. The inferno spreads forward, threatening the aft magazine, threatening the depth charge racks, threatening to cook off explosives that would break the ship's back. At almost the same moment, another Val executes a conventional bomb run from astern. This pilot has training, or luck, or both. He approaches from 5,000 feet, high enough to be outside effective Bofors range until the final seconds of his dive. The bomb releases cleanly at 1,000 feet. The pilot, having done his job, tries to pull up. He doesn't make it. 20mm fire from LCS-51 stitches across his cockpit. The Val cartwheel heels into the sea, but the bomb, already released, continues its ballistic arc. It strikes the water 30 feet from Laffey's stern and detonates. The underwater explosion is massive. The blast wave hammers the rudder and jams it hard over to 26 degrees port. The steering mechanism, not designed to absorb such shock, simply breaks. Hydraulic lines rupture. Control cables part. The rudder freezes in position. Laffey begins turning in an uncontrolled circle, a slow spiral to port that makes her predictable, vulnerable, an easier target for the next wave. Several men near the stern are killed by shrapnel that punches through the thin hull plating. Water floods into ruptured compartments. The ship takes on a slight list. Steering control is lost completely. Commander Beckton orders the engine room to compensate with differential propeller speed. More revolutions on the starboard screw, fewer on port, but it's crude, imprecise. The destroyer is now tactically crippled, unable to maneuver freely, locked in a slow spiral that gives attacking aircraft a predictable target track. Another Val and another Judy approach simultaneously from port. It's a coordinated attack, the kind that requires radio communication and planning, the kind that suggests these pilots are better trained than average. The Bofors crews are exhausted now. They've been firing for 17 minutes straight. Their weapons are so hot that paint is blistering off the barrels. Loaders are bleeding from burns and shrapnel. Several men are working wounded, with field dressings wrapped around arms and heads, but training takes over. Mount 43, despite losing 2 of its 4 guns to the earlier Val crash, continues firing with its remaining barrels. Mount 44, damaged and ablaze, has 1 gun still operational. A single loader, his hands burned raw, continues feeding it. The Val is hit multiple times. 40mm shells punch through the thin aluminum skin, through the engine block, through the fuel tanks. The aircraft should disintegrate. The fabric-covered control surfaces somehow remain intact. The pilot, wounded or dead, doesn't matter anymore. Momentum carries the aircraft forward. It crashes into the port side amidships, just above the waterline. The impact destroys the remaining operational guns on Mount 44. The mount, already damaged, simply collapses under the stress. Flames engulf the area. Gasoline hundreds of gallons from the Val's ruptured tanks floods across the deck, across Youngquist's gun positions 8 feet above the main deck, through scuppers and drainage holes. The fire spreads with terrifying speed through ventilation systems, through cable runs, through every opening in the ship's structure. It reaches the handling room below Mount 44, where ready ammunition is stored. Men fight desperately to flood the magazine before the fire reaches it. If the magazine cooks off, the ship breaks in half. The Judy follows immediately, seconds behind the Val. Whether this is intentional, using the first aircraft as a distraction, or simply the chaos of a massed attack, the effect is the same. The Judy crashes into the deck near the base of the forward stack. The impact buckles deck plating. The aircraft's bomb, a 500-pounder, penetrates 2 decks before detonating in a berthing compartment. The explosion kills everyone in the space instantly. It ruptures steam lines. Superheated steam at 650 degrees floods adjacent compartments, boiling men alive. The ship's electrical system, already stressed, begins failing. Lights flicker. Ventilation stops. Emergency battle lanterns provide the only illumination below decks. Men work in near darkness, feeling their way through smoke-filled passages, dragging wounded toward the aid station. Laffy is burning from stem to stern now. Black smoke pours from multiple locations, creating a column visible for miles. Ammunition cooks off in secondary explosions, creating a continuous fireworks display that punches hundreds of shrapnel holes through the thin superstructure. The ready service ammunition lockers for the destroyed Bofors mounts detonate, sending 40mm shells skittering across the deck like firecrackers. Some explode on impact. Others tumble overboard. A few lodge in corners and doorways, unexploded hazards that damage control parties must navigate around. 850 hours. 18 minutes into the engagement. 13 aircraft have attacked, 11 are destroyed. 2 have hit Laffy squarely. The destroyer is on fire, circling helplessly, with multiple gun mounts knocked out. Half the crew is engaged in damage control. The other half continues firing at targets that keep coming. And the radar, what's left of it, shows more contacts inbound. Then, salvation, or at least its promise. 4 Grumman FM-2 Wildcat fighters from the escort carrier Shamrock Bay arrive overhead. The FM-2, essentially a lightened version of the original Wildcat, was designed specifically for escort carrier operations. 12 Vought F-4U Corsairs follow, their distinctive gull wings and massive radial engines unmistakable even from the deck. The Combat Air Patrol has finally reached Radar Picket Station No. 1. The Marine and Navy pilots immediately engage the incoming Kamikazes, opening fire at range with their 50-caliber machine guns, trying to down the attackers before they can begin their terminal dives. But the geometry of the situation creates a nightmare that no one fully anticipated. The fighters are chasing kamikazes that are already committed to their attack runs. The Japanese pilots are diving at 300 miles per hour, sometimes faster in the final seconds. The American pilots are pursuing at 400 miles per hour or more, trying to get firing solutions on targets that are maneuvering toward a ship that is also firing everything it has into the same airspace. The vertical separation is minimal, the closing speeds are enormous, and Laffy's gunners, focused on survival, can't always distinguish friend from foe in the confusion of smoke and flame and aircraft diving from every angle. A Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar fighter dives toward Laffy, a 250-kilogram bomb slung beneath its fuselage. A Corsair is tight on its tail, 4 feet separating the planes, the American pilot's thumb pressed hard on the firing button. His 650 caliber machine guns are hammering, tracers streaming into the Oscar's empennage. The Oscar takes hits from both the Corsair and from Laffy's remaining operational Bofors. 40mm shells and 50 caliber bullets converge on the aircraft. The Oscar's tail section disintegrates. Control is lost. The Japanese pilot, in his final seconds, releases his bomb. It tumbles away, missing Laffy by 100 yards. The Oscar, no longer controllable, clips Laffy's foremast and shears off the port yardarm before crashing into the sea. The yardarm, a steel beam weighing several hundred pounds, crashes to the deck with tremendous force. The American flag, attached to the yardarm, falls with it. The pursuing Corsair, committed to his firing run, unable to pull up in time, clips Laffey's air search radar antenna. The SK air search radar, a bedspring-shaped antenna array mounted high on the mainmast, provides long-range detection of incoming aircraft. It's also fragile. The Corsair's propeller strikes the antenna's frame and shatters. The antenna topples like a falling tree, crashing to the signal deck below and nearly crushing signalman Thomas McCarthy. The Corsair, its engine damaged, begins to lose power. The pilot, demonstrating remarkable skill and composure, manages to gain just enough altitude, perhaps 200 feet, to bail out safely. His parachute deploys. He drifts down toward the ocean a quarter-mile away, where a support landing craft will later fish him out, bruised but alive. His aircraft, a $40,000 Corsair, plunges into the ocean and sinks. McCarthy, pumped with adrenaline, operating in instinct rather than conscious thought, sees the fallen flag and acts. He sprints to the flag locker, grabs a fresh ensign, and begins climbing the damaged mast. The mast is hot from fires below. It's slippery with oil and seawater. Pieces of the destroyed radar antenna dangle from broken mounting brackets, creating obstacles. McCarthy doesn't care. He climbs 50 feet up the mast while the battle continues around him, while aircraft dive and guns fire and men die. He reaches the stump of the port yardarm and lashes the new flag in place with a piece of line. The flag unfurls in the wind. It's a gesture, nothing more. It doesn't make the ship more combat effective. It doesn't increase the Bofors rate of fire. But gestures matter. They matter to the men fighting below, who glance up and see the colours still flying. They matter psychologically, spiritually, in ways that can't be quantified in after-action reports. Another Oscar approaches, the 17th attacker of the morning, one of Laffey's aft 5-inch guns, manually trained because all fire control circuits are severed, scores a direct hit at close range. The shell strikes the Oscar's engine. The aircraft explodes mid-air, showering debris across the water. The explosion is assisted by Bofors and 20mm fire, though whether those rounds contributed meaningfully or simply struck wreckage is unclear. It doesn't matter. The Oscar is destroyed. The gun crews immediately shift to the next target. 2 more Oscars streak in, one from the starboard beam, one from the starboard bow. The attacks are simultaneous, timed to split defensive fire. The Bofors crews are operating on muscle memory now. They've fired thousands of rounds. Their ears are bleeding, their arms are cramping. Loaders are functioning with shrapnel embedded in their backs and arms. Pointers track through smoke and tears and bloodshot eyes. The first Oscar is hit repeatedly, wings shredded, cockpit penetrated, fuel tanks punctured, but keeps coming. It crashes into the waterline near the forward engine room. The impact ruptures hull plating. The ocean pours in. The second Oscar takes fire from multiple mounts. It disintegrates before impact, the wreckage splashing harmlessly 200 yards out. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. 855 hours, 25 minutes of continuous combat. 22 aircraft have attacked. Most are destroyed. 6 have hit the ship directly. 4 bombs have struck or near missed. 32 men are confirmed dead, though the count will rise as damage control parties find more bodies in flooded or burned compartments. 71 are wounded, some critically. The wardroom has been converted to an emergency aid station. Ship's doctor, Lieutenant Matthew Darnell, works without stopping, performing triage under impossible conditions, deciding who can be saved and who cannot, making choices no medical school prepared him for. Fires burn everywhere. The rudder is jammed. 2 5-inch mounts are completely destroyed. Most of the 40mm and 20mm mounts are damaged or out of action. Ammunition is running dangerously low. The ship is listing 3 degrees to port from flooding. The forward fire room reports losing pressure. The radar is destroyed. Communications are reduced to sound-powered phones and shouting. And still, more contacts appear on the radar plot that someone is maintaining by hand, marking aircraft positions with a grease pencil because the electronic displays are dead. But something fundamental has changed. The combat air patrol is now between the Kamikazes and Laffy. The fighters have had time to climb, to position themselves advantageously, to organize their attacks. They're shooting down Japanese aircraft before those aircraft can begin their terminal dives. The volume of attacking aircraft decreases noticeably. Individual kamikazes that slip through the fighter screen, that somehow evade the Corsairs and Wildcats, are met by whatever guns Laffy can still muster. Often it's just a single 5-inch mount firing manually, the crew cranking the mount by hand because electrical power is gone, or it's a damaged Bofors mount with 2 guns operational instead of 4, crewed by wounded men who refuse to leave their stations. One more kamikaze makes it through. A Val, ancient even by 1945 standards, approaching from the starboard quarter. The 20mm guns engage it. The remaining twin Bofors mount tracks it. The aircraft is hit again, trailing smoke, but it's still flying, still coming. At 200 yards, the Val's engine finally fails. The propeller windmills to a stop. The aircraft glides in, unpowered, momentum carrying it toward Laffy's side. It hits the water 10 feet short of the hull. The bomb explodes on impact with the ocean. The blast wave hammers the ship's side, but the hull holds. 947 hours, 80 minutes after the attack began. The last kamikaze, intercepted by Cap fighters several miles out, falls burning into the Pacific. The engagement ends. No more contacts appear on the makeshift radar plot. The Japanese have expended their attacking force. Laffy remains afloat. Barely. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton, 41 years old, veteran of Normandy and the Philippines, surveys his ship from the bridge. The stern is a wreck of twisted metal and cooling fires. The aft 5-inch mount is simply gone, replaced by a crater. The superstructure is riddled with holes, hundreds of them, some small enough to fit a fist through, some large enough to walk through. Bodies lie covered with canvas on the deck, awaiting burial at sea. More bodies remain in flooded compartments that damage control parties haven't reached yet. Wounded men fill every available space, groaning, crying, or lying in morphine-induced stupor. But the engines still turn, both screws still pushing water despite the damaged rudder. Some guns can still fire. The hull, though punctured in multiple places, is intact enough to stay afloat. Pumps are controlling the flooding. The fires are nearly out or burning in spaces that can be sealed off and abandoned. Lieutenant Frank Manson, the assistant communications officer, approaches Beckton. His face is black with smoke. His khaki uniform is torn and blood-stained. He asks the question everyone is thinking. "Captain, will we have to abandon ship?" Beckton's response is immediate and forceful. "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire." A nearby lookout, a 19-year-old seaman whose name is lost to history, adds softly, unheard by Beckton, "And if I can find one man to fire it." Laffy earned the nickname "the ship that would not die" in the hours and days that followed. But the nickname misses the essential point. Ships don't decide to die or not die. Ships are steel and machinery. They float or sink based on physics and damage. The crew of Laffy, and specifically the crews of the Bofors mounts, stood at their weapons through 80 minutes of sustained attack because the mathematics of naval warfare in 1945 left no alternative. If the 40mm guns stopped firing, kamikazes would hit. If kamikazes hit, everyone died. It was that simple, that brutal, that clear. The broader statistics of the Okinawa campaign reveal the scale of what Laffy's crew experienced on an individual level. Between April and June of 1945, the Japanese launched 10 major kikisui operations. Floating chrysanthemum attacks the name itself, laden with cultural meaning about beauty and death and sacrifice. Each operation involved hundreds of aircraft. Operation Kikisui, one alone, on 6 and 7 April, involved 230 Navy kamikazes and 125 Army kamikazes, plus 340 conventional attackers and escorts. That's nearly 700 aircraft in a single 2-day period. The radar picket destroyers absorbed the brunt of these attacks. Ships like Laffey, Bush, Colquhoun, Hainsworth, Pringle, and dozens more stood on the outer ring, deliberately exposed, serving as shields for the fleet behind them. The human cost was staggering and specific. During the Okinawa campaign, kamikaze attacks killed approximately 4,900 American sailors. Another 4,800 were wounded. 36 ships were sunk outright. 218 ships were damaged, many severely. Among the sunk were 13 destroyers, vessels designed for combat but not designed to survive dedicated suicide attacks. The destroyer Bush took 4 kamikaze hits and sank in 30 minutes. The destroyer Colquhoun took 3 hits and had to be scuttled. The destroyer Hazelwood took 2 hits that killed 10 officers, including the commanding officer and 67 enlisted men. These were not abstract statistics. They were men with names, from towns across America, who died in fire and smoke and salt water far from home. But no heavy ships, no battleships or fleet carriers were lost at Okinawa. This was partly because the destroyers intercepted so many attacks, deliberately placing themselves between the kamikazes and higher-value targets. And it was partly because kamikaze pilots, often with fewer than 50 hours of flight training, attacked whatever target they encountered first, rather than pushing through to the battleships and carriers behind the picket line. A poorly trained pilot, seeing a destroyer firing at him, finding himself under attack by fighters, confronting walls of anti-aircraft fire, simply dove at the first ship he saw. The doctrine of using destroyers as sacrificial pawns, as expendable shields, worked precisely because it exploited the attacker's inexperience and fear. The defensive success rate, calculated coldly in after-action analyses, tells the real story. Of approximately 793 identified kamikaze attacks during the Okinawa campaign, according to Operations Research Group estimates, roughly 181 achieved hits or damaging near misses. That's a 23% hit rate for aircraft that successfully reached the attack zone and began their terminal dives. The other 77% were destroyed in flight. Combat Air Patrol accounted for about 60% of those kills, fighters shooting down kamikazes before they reached the ships. The remaining 40% fell to shipboard guns, and of shipboard guns, the Bofors 40mm was the workhorse. 5-inch guns with VT proximity fuses were devastatingly effective at range, when they had time to track and compute firing solutions. Against kamikazes diving from cloud cover at 70 degrees, or approaching at wave-top height where radar struggled to maintain lock, the heavy guns often couldn't depress quickly enough or track fast enough. By the time a 5-inch mount acquired the target, the kamikaze was inside minimum range. 20mm Oerlikons had excellent tracking capability and could follow even the most violent evasive maneuvers, but they lacked sufficient stopping power. Their small shells, weighing less than a pound, didn't carry enough explosive to guarantee kills. A kamikaze could absorb dozens of 20mm hits and keep flying long enough to crash into the ship. The 40mm Bofors occupied the crucial middle ground, heavy enough to destroy aircraft with 1 or 2 solid hits, fast enough to track diving targets through their final approach, with sufficient range to engage before the target entered its absolute terminal dive. A Bofors crew with 10 seconds of firing time could put 80 rounds into the air. If the pointer was skilled, if the trainer tracked smoothly, if the loaders maintained their rhythm, 20 or 30 of those rounds would strike the target. No aircraft survived that. Analysis conducted after the war, when staff officers had time to compile data from hundreds of action reports, credited Bofors guns with approximately half of all anti-aircraft kills by surface warships between October 1944 and the war's end. The percentage increased on ships equipped with multiple quad mounts and the Mark 51 director system. On destroyers like Laffey, with 2 quad mounts and 3 twin mounts, all potentially slaved to directors that calculated lead and deflection automatically, the effectiveness was even higher. The ability to create focused fire zones, to concentrate multiple mounts on a single target, created kill probabilities that few aircraft survived. Yet the Bofors had limitations that became painfully apparent against kamikazes. The shell was too small to accommodate VT proximity fuses. The electronics required for a proximity fuse, a miniature radar transmitter and receiver that detected the target and detonated the shell at optimum range, wouldn't fit in a 40mm projectile. The technology existed, but physics imposed limits. The smallest shell that could accommodate proximity fuse electronics was 3 inches in diameter. This meant every Bofors round required a direct hit or extremely close near miss to be effective. Against conventional bombers trying to survive their mission, trying to drop bombs and escape, this was adequate. Against suicide attackers who would fly crippled aircraft into the target with their dying breath, it was marginal at best. The Navy recognized this limitation even before Okinawa. Planning documents from late 1944, when kamikazes first appeared in significant numbers, identified the need for a weapon between the Bofors and the 5-inch guns. Something with the rapid fire and tracking capability of the 40mm, but with a shell large enough for proximity fuses. The 3-inch 50 caliber gun in twin mounts became the solution. Design work accelerated through early 1945. The Bureau of Ordnance calculated that replacing Bofors quad mounts with 3-inch twin mounts would improve anti-kamikaze firepower by 2 to 5 times, even with half as many barrels, because every shell would have a proximity fuse. In June of 1945, the 3-inch program received overriding priority. Designation. This meant materials, workers, factory space, everything necessary was allocated preferentially to 3-inch gun production. But development and production took time. Prototypes had to be tested. Manufacturing processes had to be established. Workers had to be trained. The war ended in August of 1945, before significant numbers of 3-inch guns reached the fleet. The Bofors remained the primary close-in weapon through Japan's surrender, and in that role, firing Swedish-designed shells from Swedish-designed guns manufactured in American factories, manned by American sailors who had never heard of Victor Hammarskjöld or the Bofors Company's origins, the 40mm proved itself in the most brutal testing environment imaginable. Men trying to kill you who cannot be deterred by damage, cannot be frightened into breaking off, cannot be convinced that survival matters more than mission completion. Against that enemy, the Bofors worked. Not perfectly, not without terrible cost, but it worked well enough that ships like Laffey survived when they should not have. In the final accounting, that's what mattered. Laffey was towed to Karama-Retto the day after her ordeal, where repair crews patched the worst damage. She sailed under her own power to Saipan, then to Pearl Harbor, then to Puget Sound for complete reconstruction. She returned to service in September 1945, too late for further combat but in time to participate in the occupation of Japan. She served through the Korean War, was decommissioned in 1975, and became a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina, where she remains today. Visitors walking her decks can still see the Bofors mounts, restored to operational appearance, the quad mounts with their 4 barrels pointed skyward. They can stand where the loaders stood and imagine, inadequately, what it meant to feed those weapons under fire. They can read plaques listing the dead and understand, partially, the price paid. But the essential truth of 16 April 1945 cannot be conveyed by static displays or historical markers. It was men and machines in perfect, terrible harmony. It was Swedish engineering and American industry, and sailors' courage converging at a specific point in space and time. It was 80 minutes that proved the value of every training hour, every drill, every rehearsal that prepared those crews for a moment when failure meant death. The Bofors 40mm, firing at 120 rounds per minute, throwing 2-pound shells into Pacific skies, stood between the kamikazes and their targets, and often enough, just barely often enough, it stopped them. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.